Hey guys, tonight we're sinking into the dusty sandals of someone who didn't exactly ask for this lifestyle, because you're about to become a slave in ancient Greece. And no, not the cool kind with dramatic escapes and epic speeches. Just the regular, unglamorous, day one version of being property. Picture this. The sun is too bright, the air smells like sweat and sea salt, and your wrists are chafed from the rope that's been rubbing raw skin for what feels like weeks. You've lost track of how long you've been marched, dragged really across stony ground, through unfamiliar towns, and always with that same dull ache in your back, and that creeping suspicion that things are about to get worse. You probably wouldn't survive this. Like, genuinely. Your modern self would last maybe a day before sobbing into your rust-spun tunic. But hey, let's pretend you're made of stronger stuff. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while we're here in the land of ancient despair, drop a comment below with your location and local time. I want to know when and where in the world you're listening to this history lullaby. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You come into focus somewhere near the edges of the Greek world. Maybe in Thrace or Lydia, or one of those places that Greeks always saw as ripe for pillaging. The details are fuzzy now. You've been captured in some raid, or maybe you were sold off during a local conflict. Honestly, it doesn't matter anymore. Your old name won't follow you here. You're poked, pushed, and herded with others like you. People turned into a commodity. It's quiet sometimes, except for the crunch of gravel underfoot and the occasional cough or whispered curse in a language you no longer hear with familiarity. The boat ride was the worst part. Crammed into a dark hull, surrounded by strangers who smelled like fear and mildew, you vomited more than once, though at least you weren't among the few who didn't make it off the ship. Now, standing on Athenian soil, you have no idea what's ahead, just that you're not in control. The city bustles around you. Markets ringing with bartering voices, sandal straps slapping against stone, goats making defiant eye contact. And yet, nobody seems to notice you unless they're examining your teeth. You're in a human auction, whether you like it or not. And spoiler, you do not like it. You're stripped down, oiled up, yes, oiled, to make your muscles look healthy, and spun around like a roasted pig on display. Buyers stroll past like they're choosing olives. Some ask if you can cook. Others test your shoulders. Someone even asks if you know how to play the aulos. You don't. This apparently matters. You're too young for field labor, too plain for pleasure, and too foreign to serve wine with proper Greek flair, so naturally you're sold at a discount. The man who buys you is impatient. His himation looks expensive, though his breath suggests he's recently had onions and zero regrets. You're dragged behind him through twisting alleys and uphill paths, toward a neighborhood you'll come to know very well. There's a small stone house with a red-tiled roof and a garden that looks surprisingly pleasant, for now. Inside, the mistress barely glances at you. "Put them in the courtyard," she tells someone, as if you were a sack of onions. They do. There's no ceremony to your arrival. A slave woman hands you a broom and gestures vaguely at the floor. You clean it, because what else would you do? This is your life now. Welcome. The stone beneath your feet feels warm in the afternoon sun, and the air smells faintly of olives and clay, which sounds poetic until you realize it's just because you're standing near the kitchen where lunch was just burned. The older house, slaves look at you with that combination of pity and boredom people reserve for new fish. "Don't drink from the front cistern," one mutters as she passes. They'll know. You won't remember her name, but you'll remember the advice. You sleep outside that first night. No bedding, just the dirt. There's a fig tree above you, its leaves whispering in a night breeze like it's trying to say good luck. You stare at the stars and wonder how far away your home is now, or if it ever really existed. It all feels so distant. This isn't a tale of grand suffering or rebellion, yet. It's just the quiet, monotonous brutality of becoming a thing in someone else's world. You're not even angry. Not yet. Right now, You're just tired and sore and hungry. Always hungry. Here's a fun fact to chew on. Assuming you're allowed food today, ancient Greek society relied heavily on slavery. Some estimates say that up to a third of the population in Athens were slaves. It was just normal, unremarkable, a part of the fabric. Philosophers talked about virtue and reason while their clothes were being washed by people like you. Even Aristotle argued that some people were natural slaves, which is rich coming from a guy who never had to clean a chamber pot. And here's a quirky detail for your troubles. Some wealthy Greeks gave their favorite slaves nicknames based on their jobs. You might be called clean boy or pan scraper. And honestly, that's a promotion compared to some of the other options. Slaves weren't usually allowed to marry, but informal pairings happen all the time. Sometimes, whole families were born into slavery, never knowing freedom. And still, historians debate just how cruel the system really was. Some argue that Greek slaves had more autonomy than those in later societies. Others say that's wishful thinking, based on records written by free men with nice sandals and zero empathy. Historians still wonder if Athenian democracy, so often hailed as the birth of modern political thought, could have ever existed without a massive underclass keeping everything running while the citizens debated who deserved to vote. There's something deeply ironic about being crushed under the wheels of a society that prides itself on freedom. But in this moment, lying on hard-packed dirt with nothing but a threadbare tunic and a belly that hasn't known full in days, those debates feel as distant as the gods. Still, you find yourself listening to the night sounds, crickets, distant lyre music, the snoring of an old slave by the kitchen wall, and thinking, maybe tomorrow won't be worse. It probably will be, but maybe, just maybe it won't. The market smells like regret, or more precisely like sun-baked flesh, trampled straw, and the unfortunate tang of goat urine left too long in the heat. And it's your new world now, whether you like it or not. You're hauled back to the agora like a broken wheel or a chipped amphora, return policy not included. This time you're not the only one fresh off the boat. There's a whole line of sunburned, wide-eyed humans slumped along the wooden fence, most of whom look like they've been crying in a language no one here understands. The auction block looms ahead like some absurdly cheerful death sentence, painted bright with peeling colors and surrounded by buyers whose money smells like oil and blood. A slave trader shouts in a square, praising your sturdy frame and young, obedient spirit, which is hilarious because you just bit the last guy who tried to touch your face. Still, your wrists are tied tight behind your back, and a guard with a switch makes sure you don't forget your new role. The crowd is full of potential owners, plump merchants with wine-stained robes, housewives with sharp eyes and sharper tongues, philosophers looking for someone to wash their togas, and even one man who seems disturbingly focused on your teeth. You try to stand tall, even as sweat stings your eyes and your empty stomach growls at the roasting meat cart just a few feet too far away. It's a bizarre parade. You're nudged up onto the block, forced to turn slowly like a sad, sentient weather vane, while a boy announces your supposed skills, half of which are made up on the spot. Apparently, you're good with animals, speak fluent Greek, you don't, and can cook, again a bold lie, consider your last attempt at boiling lentils ended in a minor fire. The crowd murmurs, assessing your price like you're a basket of discounted olives. You're sold fast, cheaply too, according to the smug grin of your buyer. And just like that, you're handed off again, with no more ceremony than a purse changing hands. Your new owner isn't unkind, but he isn't exactly warm either. He walks with purpose, muttering about errands, and never once looks back to see if you're keeping up. He doesn't have to. You're roped to him like a donkey, following through crowded streets where the scent of fresh bread mocks your every breath. Athens opens around you, bustling, arrogant, glorious, and not for you. The buildings are tall and sun-bleached, doors painted in chipped blues and reds, balconies draped in drying laundry and shouting children. You pass vendors selling figs, sandals, cheap perfume, and one old man yelling passionately about democracy while picking his nose. Everywhere you look, life bursts with color and noise, except in the eyes of the other slaves you pass, who barely meet your gaze, as if afraid your misery might be contagious. Eventually, you're brought to a small courtyard house tucked behind a larger estate. The front gate creaks open, revealing a shaded yard with cracked tiles and a tired-looking olive tree leaning drunkenly to one side. A wiry woman meets you at the door, looks you up and down, then immediately starts issuing instructions like she's waited all day just to tell someone what to do. You're shown your sleeping space, if you can call a pile of rags in a corner space, and warned not to speak unless spoken to, not to eat unless given permission, and not to wander unless you want to get lost and possibly sold again. The house smells like baked bread, old wood, and something slightly burnt, possibly your future. The woman is named Damaris. She's the housekeeper, head of the domestic slaves, and already your least favorite person. "We don't cry here," she tells you without looking up from the onion she's dicing. You cry, you get extra chores. She doesn't blink when a knife slips, and she nicks her own thumb, just shoves it in her mouth, and keeps going. There's a strange hierarchy in the household. Damaris answers to the lady of the house, who answers to her husband, who mostly answers to his stomach and his drinking buddies. Other slaves fill different roles. One tends to the animals, another helps the master with his accounts, and one poor kid runs errands so constantly you start to suspect he sleeps with his sandals on. You're told you'll start in the kitchen, helping with prep and cleanup. Mostly the kind of work that leaves you sticky with honey or splattered with goat fat. The kitchen is dark and humid, always buzzing with heat and flies. And the clay oven has a personality. It hisses when it doesn't like what you're doing. You work in silence at first, too scared to ask questions, but the others fill you in eventually. The cook, a heavy-set man named Linus, likes to hum obscene songs under his breath and occasionally throws bits of bread at the mice in the pantry, pretending it's target practice. "You'll get used to it," he says, handing you a bowl of barley gruel that tastes like defeat. Or you won't. Either way, nobody cares. You eat with your back against the courtyard wall, try not to think about what your family is doing right now. If they're alive. If they even know. The evenings are when a market really settles in your bones. You feel it in your calves, your cracked heels, your spine. You lie awake listening to the creak of the floorboards above, where the family sleeps on real mattresses behind real doors. You try to remember what it felt like to be called by your name. And then there are the dreams. The auction replays in your mind like a bad song stuck on repeat. The noise, the smell, the moment when your eyes locked with someone else's in the crowd and you knew, absolutely knew, that they didn't see you as human. Here's your historical fact of the day. Athens, the so-called cradle of democracy, relied heavily on slavery to function. Citizens could afford to engage in politics, philosophy, and warfare precisely because slaves like you handled the actual work of keeping the city alive. They were everything. Miners, maids, nurses, tutors, even police. That's right. Athens sometimes used public slaves as law enforcers. Imagine getting arrested by someone who doesn't even own their own sandals. And a lesser-known detail. Slave markets in Greece were often held right next to temples. Yes, sacred spaces. You could literally be sold within earshot of a priest praying to Athena for wisdom, which feels deeply on-brand for a society that worshipped logic and justice, but couldn't quite figure out basic human rights. And here's the question scholars still chew over like a tough olive. Were Greek slaves treated better than those in other ancient cultures? Some say yes, citing cases where slaves were educated, trusted with money, and even allowed to buy their freedom. Others say those examples were rare exceptions, cherry-picked from records written by people with a very obvious bias toward sandal-wearing, opinion-having citizens. The truth probably lies somewhere in the murky middle. But you don't care about scholarly debates. You care about the ache in your shoulders, the blisters on your palms, the way your stomach growls when you smell roasted lamb from the neighbor's courtyard. You care about how quiet the world gets when you're not allowed to speak unless given permission. At night, the market returns to you, not in memory, but in your bones. You feel it in how quickly you flinch at raised voices, how you keep your eyes lowered even when no one's around. You hear the bark of traders echoing in your ears, feel the phantom weight of rope even when your hands are free for the evening. You're not just tired, you're inventory that's learned how to breathe quietly. Still, you lie under the stars again, same hard ground, same tired fig tree overhead, and listen. Far off, a lyre twangs lazily in someone's hands. A breeze stirs the air, warm and dry like an exhale. You imagine what it might be like to walk these streets freely, to laugh at a joke in the marketplace without fear. You probably never will, but sometimes the mind wanders, even when the body is tethered. Especially then, you learn your place quickly, not because anyone tells you, but because everyone shows you constantly like it's their favorite game and you're the ball. On your second day in the household, you make the mistake of entering a room while the mistress is still eating, and the look she gives you, sharp enough to peel figs, plants a cold little seed of caution deep in your chest. From then on, you become a shadow, an expert in invisibility, moving through corridors like a whisper, always avoiding eye contact and footsteps that echo too loud. You're not just a servant. You're part of the furniture, an animate object that cleans, carries, and occasionally gets hit when someone else is in a bad mood. There's an unspoken choreography in the house, a social ballet that you're shoved into without rehearsal. You bow your head at the right angles, step aside before being noticed, and master the fine art of holding your breath in hallways to avoid drawing attention. You quickly realize that respect in this household travels in one direction, up. Everyone above you is allowed to shout, sigh, or slap. You, meanwhile, are expected to smile and scrub the same patch of floor until it sparkles or your knees give out, whichever comes first. The family dog, a spoiled little mop with legs named Thanos, is treated with more affection than any human slave in the house. He gets goat milk in a ceramic bowl with painted dolphins on it. You get lentils if you're lucky and moldy crusts if you're not. There's even a special blanket for him, embroidered, no less, which you once had the misfortune of accidentally stepping on. The resulting scolding lasted 20 minutes and included a lecture on respecting property, which you're pretty sure included the dog but not you. Your job description is impressively vague. Today it's laundry, scrubbing tunics at the public fountain, your arms elbow deep in gray water that smells like crushed olives in desperation. While yesterday, it was hauling amphorae of wine into the cellar. Tomorrow? Who knows? Probably something equally backbreaking, like moving sacks of barley or holding a lantern for 6 hours straight while the master reads scrolls he only half understands. There's no such thing as a schedule. You work until someone says stop, which could mean sunset or not at all. You're yelled at for moving too slow, then yelled at again for moving too quickly and startling the baby. You learn to time your footsteps to the rhythm of the household, to anticipate the lady's temper, the master's moods, and the quiet cues that signal when it's safe to breathe deeply. You start to notice things, which tile in the hallway creaks, which stools are secretly wobbly, and where the cat likes to hide dead mice. You memorize every inch of the house, not out of curiosity, but because you have to. Knowledge is the closest thing to protection. One time, you forget to extinguish a lantern in the storeroom, and the smoke leaves a black smudge on the wall. You're beaten for carelessness, but what hurts more is the disappointment in Damaris's eyes. Not sympathy, just that quiet, exhausted kind of scorn that says, you should have known better. You start calling her Stone Eyes in your head because nothing ever seems to surprise her, not even pain. You share a sleeping corner with 2 other slaves, a girl named Melia, who speaks only when spoken to, and an older man called Iasos, who tells long, meandering stories before bed, mostly about gods, battles, and the kinds of freedoms he imagines were real once. You don't know whether he's ever been free or if he just likes pretending he remembers what choice tasted like. Either way, his voice soothes you when the nights stretch too long and your legs ache in a way that sleep can't fix. A common story among you all. You're here, but no one remembers how exactly you ended up on that first boat or auction block. Time smears together like oil on a cracked dish. One thing is clear. Once you're in, you're in. There's no polite exit, no retirement plan, no thanks for your years of unpaid service. You live here now. You work. You are replaceable. Your masters are a study in contradictions. The woman of the house hosts luncheons where she praises mercy and wisdom while demanding her fruit be peeled to perfection by you. Or else, the man spends afternoons debating virtue with his friends, wine-drunk and philosophical, while you're outside sweeping up the crumbs they scatter like confetti. You overhear him once, quoting Socrates, "The unexamined life is not worth living." You smile bitterly into the broom. Yours gets examined, plenty thanks. The only thing you don't understand is why you're not allowed in the front rooms unless carrying something. Don't touch the symposium couch, Damaris tells you, like it's a sacred relic. And in a way, it is a space reserved for free men to lounge and theorize, while you're left to sweep under their dangling feet like some sort of ironic joke. Here's your historical tidbit. Greek homes were designed with separate spaces for men and women, often including separate quarters for slaves. You weren't just socially invisible, you were architecturally erased. That little corridor behind the kitchen, that's where you belong. That back entrance no one notices, that's your front door. And a lesser-known detail, in some homes, slaves were expected to change posture, literally bow or kneel, anytime a free person entered the room, even if they were in the middle of another task. Imagine picking up broken ceramic and being told to kneel mid-shard. Graceful. And scholars still argue over how rigid these hierarchies were. Some believe slaves could earn limited trust, even rise to positions of influence in the household. Others argue that's optimistic revisionism, comforting stories we tell ourselves to soften the horror of systemic dehumanization. The truth probably lies somewhere in the in-between. Moments of small mercy, drowned in a sea of routine humiliation. You keep your head down, but not because you're weak, because looking up takes energy you'd rather save the stairs. You adapt, not because you forget who you were, but because the house makes you someone else. In time, you learn to move like the others, quick, quiet, precise. You learn that sometimes survival is about being forgettable. And occasionally, you hear laughter even among the slaves. Not always from cruelty, sometimes from absurdity. Like the day the master fell off his donkey and demanded to be carried home like a hero returning from war, despite nothing being injured except his ego. You carried one end of the makeshift litter, biting your cheek to keep from laughing, while Melia muttered, "Great Achilles has returned from battle." That night, for once, the soup tasted better. Not because it changed, but because you laughed, and that felt strangely close to living. You clean, they eat. That's the rhythm of your day, simple and brutal as a drumbeat that never stops. And the more they eat, the more you clean, as if their gluttony multiplies your suffering with every chewed fig and oily smear left on the table. Morning begins before the sun even stretches its fingers over the rooftops, while the world is still shrouded in that cool, violet hush just before dawn, and already you're scrubbing bowls that smell of garlic and fish from the night before. The floor beneath your knees is cold stone, worn smooth from decades of kneeling bodies, and you've joined their silent lineage now, one elbow deep in greasy dishwater at a time. The kitchen wakes up groaning and clanging, fires rekindled, dough kneaded by hands that barely remember what softness feels like, and the scent of fresh bread mocks your empty belly. You watch the house come alive for their breakfast. Milk warmed just so, fruit sliced into neat little shapes, honey poured like it grows on trees. While your own meal, when it comes, is a bowl of tepid barley gruel that sticks to the sides like sadness. No one thanks you. They never do. In fact, The only time your presence is acknowledged is when something goes wrong. The bread is too hard, the floor is still damp, the towels are folded the wrong way, which you didn't even know was possible. There's a particular kind of injustice in this. How your invisibility is only broken by blame. How silence is safety, but also erasure. You wipe your hands on your tunic and scurry back to your place before the lady of the house enters. Because if she sees you idling for even a heartbeat, she'll make you polish copper until your fingers go raw. Sometimes you wonder if she sees you at all, or just a convenient blur that hauls trays and folds linen. She doesn't know your name, and honestly, you're not sure she ever plans to. The master, on the other hand, calls all the male slaves boy, even if you're clearly not one, and once referred to you as that one with the arms. It's hard to know whether to be insulted or flattered. After the breakfast chaos comes the real labor, scrubbing courtyards, cleaning the andron where the men drink and argue about virtue, and dealing with the terrifying labyrinth of the storage room, where one wrong move gets you buried in a cascade of amphory, sacks of barley, and judgment. The day blurs into heat and repetition. You sweep with a rhythm that begins to feel meditative, like a terrible kind of music. Sweep, bend, dump, repeat. Sometimes you catch yourself humming, and it scares you, like some part of you is trying to pretend this is normal. There's a strange moment during lunch prep when you catch Thanos, the little dog, chewing on a corner of one of the master's scrolls. You freeze, debating whether to warn someone or let the mutt take the fall. Eventually, you tell Damaris, who whisks the scroll away and mutters something about divine punishment. Later that day, the dog vomits in the andron, and no one makes the connection except you and the other slaves, who can barely suppress their glee. It's the closest thing to justice you've seen all week. You aren't allowed to eat until after the family, and even then, it depends on what's left. Some days, you get lucky. Half a roasted onion, a piece of bread soaked in meat juices, the tail end of figure. Other times, it's gruel again, flavored faintly with bitterness and smoke. You eat quickly, seated on the back step with the other servants, elbows knocking as you try to finish before the next command is barked your way. You learn to treasure the small moments, the taste of something sweet by accident, the feel of sunlight on your face when no one is yelling, the thrill of stealing a grape when no one's looking. These are your victories now. One day, as you're scrubbing the mosaic tiles in the triclinium, you pause for a moment and trace the pattern with your fingertips. It's beautiful, really, tiny pieces of colored stone forming images of dolphins, vines, and dancing satyrs. You wonder who made it. You wonder if they were free. You wonder if they're still alive. That's the thing about slavery. It shrinks your world down to a series of immediate tasks, but your mind still wanders. You still imagine. You still ask questions you're not allowed to speak aloud. Here's a widely accepted fact for your pondering. Household slaves in ancient Greece weren't usually beaten as often as public slaves or those working in the mines. It wasn't out of kindness. It was economics. Damaging property is bad business. That said, not as often doesn't mean never. You've seen it happen, a wooden rod cracking across someone's back because they dropped a jar, or worse, talked back. And here's something more obscure. There was actually a word for food left over from the master's table, reserved for slaves, apomagdalia, the scraps. That's what you eat. That's what you live on. And yet, in a bizarre twist of the Greek mind, the very people who lived off table scraps were also expected to serve them with a certain grace. Drop a dish and you're clumsy. Serve too slow and you're lazy. Serve too fast and you're impertinent. It's a tightrope with no end, and the rope is frayed. Scholars still debate how slaves in households like this felt. Were there moments of loyalty, affection? Did some actually feel like they belonged? Or is that just wishful nostalgia written by those who never scrubbed a floor until their knuckles bled? Some evidence suggests a few slaves developed close relationships with their masters, even became trusted confidants. But those are outliers. You're too new, too distant, too busy wiping footprints off stone tiles that your own feet are never allowed to rest on. One evening, after a particularly long day of cleaning up after a symposium, meaning a drunken mess of wine, philosophical nonsense, and someone vomiting in a potted plant, you collapse near the garden wall, too tired to even eat. Amelia sits beside you and shares a crust of bread without a word. The moon is high, and the night air smells of rosemary and charcoal. In this moment, everything is still. No shouting, no clanging, no dog barking for attention. Just the two of you breathing. You look up and think, maybe tomorrow won't be worse. You've thought that before. Sometimes it's even true. Dreams of freedom? Goo. That's what the older slaves call it when you dare to wonder aloud. Just once. If you'll ever leave this place as anything other than a ghost. It slips out one evening, half a breath, not even a real question. Do people ever get out? And Damaris, without looking up from the olive press, chuckles in that flat, dry way of someone who's watched too many dreams go sour. You mean manumission? She says, like the word itself is a joke. Sure, happens. Like rain in the desert. You quickly learn that freedom isn't an end goal. It's a rumor. A whispered myth. A dangling carrot that only the most skilled, lucky, or unusually well-placed slaves ever taste. And even then, usually under the most ironic conditions. You hear stories from the older ones about slaves who bought their freedom by saving wages, which you don't get, or earned it by loyal service, whatever that means, or were gifted it in some master's will, often just before death, when it no longer mattered. But those stories have the feel of bedtime tales, told to keep the heart beating, not because they're expected to come true. Amelia tells you about a boy she knew once, a clever little thing who worked as a tutor and was promised freedom when his master died. Except when the man finally keeled over, his will was burned in a dispute over wine money, and the boy was resold before the ashes cooled. Another slave swears he once met a freedman who wore a golden ring and had his own house, but even he admits that might have been a dream or a lie or both. Still, the concept sits in your mind like a glowing ember. Freedom. What would it even look like? You imagine waking up whenever you want, walking through the streets without a chaperone, choosing your own clothes, even if they're plain, eating a meal that you picked, cooked, and didn't have to share, having your name back, fully, without being called boy, girl, you, or that one with the chipped tooth. And then there's the ultimate fantasy, saying no. The idea is almost laughable. So much of your existence is structured around obedience that even considering refusal feels like plotting the collapse of the cosmos. You'd probably apologize just out of habit. The closest you get to rebellion is passive defiance, scrubbing a bit slower, hiding a cracked cup instead of reporting it, slipping a second crust of bread to Amelia when no one's watching. These are your tiny, invisible victories, and they matter more than you'd expect. Because hope, even in microscopic doses, keeps something alive inside you. And that's dangerous. Not just to the masters, but to you. Hope makes you reckless, makes you wonder, makes you remember. And memory? Memory is the enemy of survival in this place. You try not to think of your old home, your real name, the sound of your mother's voice, soft and firm at the same time, because those things create distance, and distance makes the present hurt more. So you let it all blur. You are what you do now. You're cleaning, lifting, fetching, bowing. That's it. That's safety. But freedom still finds a way to creep in, like a weed between paving stones. You learn that there are classes of slaves who have slightly better chances at manumission, especially those with technical skills. Cooks, scribes, doctors, even musicians. If a slave proves particularly profitable, a master might let them rent their own labor, keeping a portion of the profits and eventually saving enough to buy freedom. It sounds nice, but good luck convincing your current owners that you're a secret sculptor or math prodigy. You once tried drawing a picture in the dust with a broom handle. It was a cat, or maybe a lion, depending on who you asked, but Damaris smacked her hand and told you, "This isn't a theater, scrub the floor." And here's a lesser-known historical tidbit. Freed slaves in ancient Greece were still heavily restricted. Even after manumission, they weren't considered full citizens. They couldn't vote, couldn't own land in many places, and were often required to maintain some obligations to their former masters. In Athens, for example, a freed slave might still owe duties like managing errands or paying tributes. It's freedom with strings, like being unchained but still holding the leash. Historians still argue over the nature of manumission. Was it a gesture of kindness? A transaction? A bribe for loyalty? Some believe it offered real opportunity, a chance at economic success and personal autonomy. Others point out that it created a two-tiered system, citizen and quasi-citizen, where ex-slaves were just a slightly better kind of property, useful for filling in the cracks of society without disrupting the foundations. You wonder which kind of freed person you'd be, grateful or bitter, quiet or bold. Would you marry, build a home, or would you just drift, haunted by years of orders and cracked knuckles? And most of all, would you ever stop flinching when someone raises their voice? One day, while carrying laundry back from the public fountain, you see a man with a strange swagger. He's older, with a limp and a wide-brimmed hat, and he carries himself like he owns the street. You expect him to shout or shove past you, but he just nods, actually nods, as if you're a person. You stand there dumbfounded. Melia notices and whispers later that night, "Freedman, you can tell by the ring." Apparently, he used to be a slave in a weaving shop, worked his way up, bought himself out, and now runs a stall at the market. He even pays his workers, she adds, which sounds almost as absurd as a dog reading Homer. Still, the image sticks with you, not because you believe it'll happen for you, but because it happened at all. That night, under the fig tree in your corner of the courtyard, you let your mind wander. You picture yourself older, wearing your own sandals, sitting at a table you bought, eating food you chose. You even allow yourself to imagine someone asking you for help, and you deciding yes or no. The fantasy is brief but sharp, like a bird landing on your shoulder and flying off before you can blink. You tuck it away like a secret. It's foolish, of course, but maybe, just maybe, that foolishness is worth keeping. Because even in a world that forgets your name, buries your worth, and calls you lucky for not being beaten today, hope refuses to be scrubbed out completely. The gods aren't hiring, and that becomes painfully clear the first time you're dragged to a household altar at dawn and told to pour libations to Athena while your arms still ache from yesterday's laundry and your stomach growls like a dying goat. It's the kind of ritual that's meant to inspire divine protection, but mostly just leaves you sticky with wine and wondering if the gods are as indifferent to your existence as your masters are. The family prays with such sincerity, eyes closed and hands outstretched, murmuring ancient hymns like they mean something, while you stand in the background, watching, waiting, holding a shallow bowl, and try not to drop it as the master invokes blessings on his sons, his fields, his investments, basically everything except the people keeping it all running. You're part of the ritual, but not the prayer, a prop in the family's performance of piety. And while they chant for favor in the next olive harvest, you're thinking about whether or not your slice of bread today will have mold on it. There's a small shrine built into the courtyard wall, crumbling a bit around the edges, but still carefully swept each morning. A small clay statue of Hestia watches you clean with blank, eternal eyes, and you can't help but wonder if she sees you, or if, like everyone else, she looks right through. The lady of the house insists on regular sacrifices, bits of cake, drops of oil, even a full chicken once, which you had to pluck and gut beforehand. And each time, she mutters for harmony in the home, as if the gods are just picky guests that need to be bribed to behave. You notice that when things go wrong, a storm ruins the laundry, or a dish breaks, or the child gets sick, the first reaction is to blame the ritual, not the person who actually dropped the cup or left the baby out in the sun too long. It's always, the gods are angry. Never, maybe we should treat people better. And when that happens, it's often you who ends up cleaning the mess and offering the apology on someone else's behalf. One particularly hot afternoon, You're told to carry a basket of figs to the temple of Demeter on behalf of the mistress. The walk is long, up dusty hills and through crowded streets, and the figs smell so sweet and ripe that it's almost physically painful not to eat one. But you don't, because you know how this works. The temple is busy, full of other slaves and women making offerings, some out of faith, others out of obligation, all under the watchful gaze of white-robed priests who seem more interested in counting coins than counting souls. You place the figs on the altar, whisper the standard prayer, and head back, empty-handed and even emptier inside. Along the way, you pass another temple, this one to Hermes, god of travelers, liars, and thieves, which feels like a pointed combination, and you pause. No one's watching. Just for a moment, you close your eyes and silently ask, "Do you see me?" Of course, there's no answer. Not from Hermes, not from Athena, not from any of them. Because here's your historical fact for the night. While ancient Greek religion was deeply woven into daily life, it wasn't particularly concerned with morality. The gods weren't good. They were powerful, moody, often petty, and expected worship not because they were just, but because they were dangerous to ignore. Sacrifices weren't about righteousness. They were about survival. Appeasement. Insurance policies paid in blood and grain. And a lesser-known fact, slaves were technically allowed to participate in many religious rituals, and some even joined festivals and processions, but always on the margins. You could carry the torch, but not speak the vows. You could pour the wine, but not drink it. Even in worship, you were an accessory, a background detail. Some slaves found comfort in the mystery cults, those secretive religious groups that promise salvation, rebirth, or secret knowledge. The cult of Dionysus, for example, welcomed outsiders, women, and yes, even slaves into ecstatic, wine-soaked rituals that blurred the lines of identity. You hear rumors from one of the stable boys that his cousin once danced with the Maenads, wild women of Dionysus, and claimed to see visions. He said he was free for 3 nights straight. The boy whispers, eyes wide with wonder. Then he went back to work and never smiled again. Historians still argue over whether these cults genuinely offered psychological refuge or just temporary illusions. Were they tools of empowerment or just another form of control wrapped in ivy and smoke? You don't know, but part of you wants to find out. You start watching the skies at night, trying to trace constellations between your chores. The other slaves say it's a waste of time. Stars don't feed you. But you like the feeling of something larger, something untouchable, something not owned by anyone. Your favorite is Orion, the hunter. You imagine he was a slave, once too, before he was turned into stars. It gives you comfort in a strange, childish way. But then morning comes, and it's back to cleaning the courtyard and fetching water. There's a philosopher who visits the house occasionally, a friend of the master's, who spends hours talking about ethics and the soul. He says things like, "All men are brothers under the stars," while you refill his wine cup without spilling a drop. One day, he even notices you and says, "Ah, the noble laborer," and pats your head like you're a dog. You want to ask him, if all souls are equal, why do I sleep on straw? But you don't, because that would be unwise. That night, you dream of sitting at the altar wearing white robes, pouring oil for a God who actually listens. You dream of being seen, really seen. Not as a servant, not as a body, not as background, but as a soul. You wake up before dawn and wash your face in cold water, pushing the dream away like steam from your skin. Because dreams, like prayers, are luxuries in short supply. And yet, you keep looking at the sky, just in case. Your body begins to change without asking your permission, quietly, subtly, like the way a rope frays over time. And you barely notice it at first because survival doesn't give you time to reflect in front of polished bronze mirrors. Not that you'd ever be allowed to stand still long enough to try. But it's there, creeping into your limbs and your breath. The way your shoulders ache more than they used to, how your knees complain on the stairs, and how the bruises take longer to fade now. as if your skin has decided it's tired too. You've grown stronger. Technically, carrying amphory and hauling laundry up steep paths will do that, but it's not the kind of strength that feels empowering. It's the kind that comes from necessity, not training. Your muscles ache not from triumph, but from repetition. Your back is always stiff by midday. Your hands have grown thick calluses that crack in the cold. And your feet, well, your feet have seen better days. Blisters, cuts, cracked skin from standing too long in sandals that barely count as shoes, if you can even call them yours. You begin to sleep more lightly too, not because you're less tired, but because your body has trained itself to snap awake at the slightest sound. A creaking door, a change in breathing from someone nearby, the scrape of a sandal on the tile. The quiet part of your brain never rests anymore. It listens always, and it learns. You start anticipating things before they happen. When the baby's going to cry, when the master's about to yell, when Damaris is in one of her rare good moods and might slip you a crust of bread that hasn't gone stale. You even get good at avoiding pain, not avoiding work, mind you, because that's impossible, but dodging injuries. You learn which corners of the cellar are slick with moisture, which steps wobble, and how to twist your shoulder just right so you can carry the basket without it digging into your collarbone. These small skills don't earn praise, but they do earn you fewer beatings, and that's its own kind of reward. The worst injuries aren't even the visible ones. They're the ones that settle inside you quietly. Sore joints, breathless moments when your chest tightens too fast, days when your hands won't stop shaking no matter how tightly you grip the broom. You try not to limp. Limping gets noticed. And in this world, being noticed is not a good thing. If you complain, you're told to work through it. If you collapse, you're told you should have spoken up sooner. And if you dare to rest without permission, well, the broom handle leaves bruises too, and Damaris doesn't miss. You hear of one slave, a boy no older than you, who snapped his arm while lifting a cartload of olive jars. They splinted it, sure, but not out of care. More like patching a tool, so it still works. He never regained full strength, and a few weeks later, he was gone. Sold? Freed? Buried? No one ever says. Just gone. That's how it works. You vanish when you stop being useful. The body isn't sacred here. It's a commodity, a vessel for labor. And when that vessel cracks, it's replaced. Here's your historical truth for tonight. Slaves in ancient Greece had no legal protections regarding physical harm. Masters could beat, starve, or even kill their slaves without punishment in most cases, especially if the act could be spun as discipline. There were no courts to hear your pain, no laws to shield you from cruelty. You were property, not personhood. And a lesser-known fact? Some wealthier households actually employed slave doctors. Physicians who were themselves enslaved, treating injuries in other slaves or even their masters. Imagine that, being treated by someone just as powerless as you, who learned the art of healing not out of compassion, but because the household didn't want to spend money on a citizen physician. Sometimes, though, the sick were simply left to heal or die on their own. If you had fever, you were isolated. If you had a cough, you were handed herbs and told to keep quiet. You become familiar with every homemade remedy in the house. Vinegar for wounds, garlic for infections, and one particularly awful-smelling paste made of boiled onions and honey that they swear cures everything. It doesn't, but it keeps people busy, and busy people don't ask questions. Historians still debate how often slaves were truly cared for by their masters. Were there cases of genuine concern, medical attention, humane treatment? Probably. But those are the exceptions, not the rule. In the average household, health was a cost-benefit analysis. You were fixed if you were worth fixing. Otherwise, you were replaced, buried quietly, and mentioned only when someone asked why there was an extra mat in the servant's corner. And through all this, through the bruises and the blisters and the sleepless nights, your body keeps going. It adapts. You learn to sleep sitting up, to walk quietly on aching legs, to chew stale bread with a chipped tooth. You keep moving not because you're strong, but because stopping feels more dangerous than continuing. And yet, sometimes you catch glimpses of the body you used to have. In the reflection of water as you scrub the fountain basin. In the curve of your fingers as you twist wet cloth. In the weight of your own breath as you stare at the ceiling at night. Lungs dragging in air like reluctant guests. You remember running once, just for fun. Running for no reason, with your arms wide and your legs flying like the world was yours. That memory comes back sometimes. It hurts more than the bruises. And yet, in this place where your body is both tool and prison, there's something defiant in remembering that once it was free. You start to notice how much of your life is ruled by shadows. Not just literal ones cast by the clay-tiled roofs and high stone walls, but social ones, the kinds of invisible lines that separate the people who own time from the people who are trapped inside it. And as a slave, you are so deep inside the latter that the concept of leisure becomes almost mythological, like something whispered about but never seen, a luxury meant for the gods or the ones who think themselves gods. Reclining on couches with their sandals off while you stand rigid nearby, ready to pour more wine or clear another dish the moment it's waved away. The masters take their leisure like they take everything else, with expectation, with ease, with that casual cruelty that comes from never having to earn rest. And so you learn very early on that while their time is structured around symposiums, games, strolls, and long debates about beauty or courage, your time is measured in tasks. How many amphorae you can carry before your fingers slip. How fast you can polish the floor tiles before the guests arrive. How quietly you can clear plates without being noticed or worse, acknowledged. You live on the margins of their idleness, watching as they laugh and stretch and quote Homer as if they've ever truly suffered, while you shuffle through rooms like a living whisper, learning to anticipate their whims before they even speak. And yes, the symposiums are the worst. You know them by smell first. Roasted meat, spiced wine, sweat, and a hint of arrogance. And they begin in the late afternoon when the men start trickling into the andron, talking louder the more cups they drain, reclining on couches that you're not allowed to look at directly unless you're cleaning underneath them. They debate politics and ethics, mock each other's poetry, and throw bones at the dog. They shout for more wine, more food, more music, and you are the one fetching it. Your arms ache from holding trays above your shoulders, your knees from kneeling to refill craters, and your pride for being treated like an animated platter. Once a guest reaches out and flicks your ear for luck during a game, and everyone laughs, even the master. You don't. Later, Melia tells you she once saw a slave girl order to dance during a symposium, just to break the boredom. And when she refused, they beat her and made her do it anyway. She danced with blood on her lip, Melia says flatly, as if describing the weather. That's what leisure looks like when you're not invited. Violent, loud, and utterly indifferent to your suffering. And here's your historical fact for tonight. Symposiums in ancient Greece were not just social gatherings. They were deeply embedded into elite male culture, where philosophy, drinking, and performance all collided in ways that often excluded women and, of course, any enslaved people from actual participation. You were there, yes, but never truly present. You served the food, poured the wine, cleaned the vomit, but you were never invited to speak or be. A lesser-known fact? Slaves at these events were sometimes expected to memorize lines of poetry or perform music, not for their own joy, but to amuse their drunken audience. If you couldn't sing, you clapped. If you couldn't clap, you smiled. If you couldn't smile, you were dismissed or punished. And historians still debate whether these gatherings ever offered a genuine outlet for slaves to overhear philosophy and learning, or whether that's just the wishful thinking of modern readers who don't want to admit how thoroughly silence can be enforced. You sometimes wonder what they'd say if you could speak freely in that room. If, instead of serving the wine, you stood in the center and said, "What does virtue mean to someone who has no choice?" But of course, that's a fantasy. In reality, you pour, you fetch, you clean. And when it's over, you scrub the floors sticky with wine, gather the bones the guests tossed behind couches, and carry out the slumped bodies of men who drank themselves into nonsense. The next morning, no one remembers your face. You are part of the furniture again, the invisible machine behind their entertainment. And the worst part? Sometimes they talk about you as if you're not there. That one's strong, they say, gesturing at your back while you sweep. Could be a good rower. Or, don't let that girl get too clever, they steal when they start thinking. You learn to keep your eyes low and your ears open. Information is power, even if you're not allowed to use it. You know who's cheating on whom, which guests lie about their family wealth, which ones borrow money they'll never repay. You collect secrets like crumbs under the table, and though you can't spin them, they form a little fortress in your mind, a small place where you hold the truth, even if no one else sees it. Once, during a rare quiet moment, Isos tells you about the games he remembers from his youth, back before he was captured. We used to race, he says, his eyes clouded with something soft and distant. Not for money, just for fun, just to feel fast. You try to imagine a world where running is for joy, not for errands, and it almost makes you laugh. Your body is too tired to run now. It's barely keeping up with walking. But that idea, running for no reason, sticks with you like a song you heard in a dream. In the rare moments you're alone, maybe when you're fetching water at dawn or sweeping the outer courtyard under the cypress trees, you move just a little faster, just for a second, and let yourself pretend you're not running to serve, but running just because you can. That's your leisure now. A heartbeat stolen from the day, a breath of movement that no one ordered. And it's not much, but it's yours. Somewhere along the way, the house itself starts to feel like a living creature, one that breathes when you breathe and sighs when you sigh, but always louder, always heavier, as if it's reminding you who really owns the air here. And this creature is made of stone and silence and 1,000 doors that never open for you, not unless you're carrying something or being scolded, and even then, you're meant to slip through them like smoke, leaving no trace of your passing behind. The floors remember your footsteps, even if the people don't. The walls hear your muttered curses, your stolen songs, your weary prayers whispered into the mop water. You begin to know every inch of the place by heart. The sound a fourth stair makes when someone heavy climbs it, the patch of tile near the rear storeroom that's always just a little uneven, the window in the kitchen that lets in a sliver of moonlight when you're cleaning late and everyone else is sleeping or pretending not to hear the baby cry. You move through it like a ghost with chores, not haunting, but serving, drifting from room to room while the family sleeps soundly in linen sheets you washed, on beds you made, surrounded by comforts you polished with your sore hands. And the house demands everything. It eats your time, drinks your strength, chews up your patience, and spits out exhaustion. There's no such thing as off-duty. Even at night, your ears stay open, trained for the sound of footsteps or coughing or that awful silence that comes before someone yells your name. You learn the rhythm of the household the way a soldier learns the sound of his commander's boots, instinctively, fearfully, with a kind of involuntary respect. There's a certain hierarchy inside this beast of a building too, not just among the family, but among the slaves. Damaris runs the house like she owns it, even though she doesn't. Her authority comes from seniority, from competence, from the way she can silence a room with just a look. You watch her closely, trying to learn that trick. You think if you could just master that stare, maybe people would stop shoving past you like your furniture. Then there's Ireneos, who handles the storerooms and knows where everything is, down to the last grain sack. He's quiet, efficient, and dangerous to cross. Not because he's mean, but because if you get on his bad side, you'll never find the good towels or the fresh bread again. Social survival is its own kind of warfare here. You form alliances, unspoken agreements about who'll cover for whom when someone oversleeps, who'll share scraps, who won't snitch when you sneak an extra sip of diluted wine. There are betrayals too. Someone tells the master that you broke a dish when you didn't, and you spend a week doing extra chores in punishment, knowing full well who did it. and choosing to say nothing because revenge, in this house, is a luxury only the powerful can afford. Occasionally, the outside world tries to slip in, through gossip, through visitors, through slivers of overheard conversation. A traveling merchant talks about war in the north. A cousin of the mistress complains about new taxes. You listen from behind doorways, pretending not to hear. Every piece of outside information feels like contraband, like stolen fruit. You don't get much of the world beyond these walls. So when you do, it feels both intoxicating and cruel. There's a boy who works in the stables, barely old enough to grow a beard, who says he once saw a theater play in the city. They wore masks, he tells you, eyes wide, and the actors shouted so loud, you could feel it in your chest. You want to ask what the story was about, but he doesn't remember. Just the noise, the colors, the feeling of being somewhere else. You tuck that story away in your mind like a keepsake, imagining yourself in the audience, sitting in the dark, no trays in your hands, just watching. You think about escape sometimes, not seriously, not really, but in that vague, drifting way you think about flying or turning invisible. What if you just slipped out the side gate one night and walked until the sun rose? What if you made it to a port, stowed away on a ship, and sailed somewhere new where no one knows your name? Or rather, where you can pick your own. The problem isn't getting away. It's what comes after. Where would you go? Who would trust you? Who would feed you without asking what you can offer in return? You've lived so long by someone else's schedule, someone else's permission, that the idea of freedom is both thrilling and terrifying, like stepping off a cliff with no idea what's below. And here's your historical fact for tonight. While slave escapes did happen in ancient Greece, they were rare and extremely risky. Most who tried were caught and punished harshly, often branded, mutilated, or sold into even worse conditions. But they still tried. That fact alone tells you something. That even the chance of a harder life was better than the certainty of this one. A lesser-known detail: some runaway slaves found their way into communities of outcasts, surviving on the fringes, sometimes even posing as free. Others were taken in by traveling performers, thieves, or fishermen. But those stories are hard to confirm. Historians still debate how many of them are real and how many are just tales slaves told each other in the dark to keep hope alive. And maybe that's the point. Not whether the stories are true, but whether they're possible. Because if someone, somewhere, made it out, maybe you could too. But for now, the house owns your hours. It decides when you sleep, when you eat, when you kneel. Even the sun feels like it rises not for the world, but for the sake of the master's daily schedule. And yet, strangely, you do begin to understand the rhythm of the place. Not in affection, but in familiarity. You know when the olives will be picked. You know the sound of the laundry flapping on the line. You know the smell of stew before the mistress tastes it and asks for more time. The house may not be kind, but it is predictable. And sometimes, predictability is the closest thing to safety you have. You don't love it. You don't even like it. But you've learned how to live inside its breath. You learn to read people faster than you ever learned to read words. How they move, how they speak, how they hide their intentions beneath casual gestures and smiles that don't touch their eyes. And it becomes one of the most useful tools in your invisible toolbox, this sixth sense of reading the room the moment you enter it. Feeling the temperature not in the air, but in the tension that clings to voices and footsteps like dust on the marble floors. You never stop scrubbing. The masters speak in measured tones that sharpen when they're angry, but the danger is always clearest in the silence. When they pause just a beat too long before answering, or when the mistress closes her fan with that delicate little snap, that means someone's about to be scolded, and it might just be you. You recognize the twitch in a master's jaw when the olives aren't to his liking, or how he drums his fingers when he's about to send for someone to blame for his boredom. The children are easier. Their chaos wrapped in silk, unpredictable, but not yet cruel in the calculated way their parents are. One minute they want to braid your hair or show you their pet beetle, and the next they're shrieking to their mother that you looked at them funny, because you dared to blink while they were telling a story. You quickly figure out which family members to avoid when they've been drinking, which ones to appease with a compliment, and which ones never look you in the eye unless they're about to order you to fetch something. These aren't lessons anyone teaches you directly. They're learned through bruises, through scoldings, through long nights replaying conversations in your head and wondering what you said wrong. You learn the house politics too. How the mistress hates her cousin but pretends to adore her during visits. How the master nods and hums through the philosopher's lectures while clearly thinking about lunch. How Damaris is secretly hoarding oil in the back pantry because she doesn't trust the new supplier. No one talks to you, but everyone talks around you. And you pick up more in those fragments than they realize. There's power in observation, even if you can't use it openly. It makes you sharper, and in a place where power is denied to you in every official sense. Even the smallest private edge feels like a stolen jewel tucked under your tongue. Here's your historical fact. Slaves in ancient Greece often became intimately familiar with their owners' private lives, especially those who served within the household rather than on farms or in workshops. Some even acted as messengers, secret keepers, and mediators between family members. Their silence wasn't just expected, it was vital. In a world without locked doors or digital privacy, trust was built on the assumption that a slave wouldn't repeat what they saw or heard. Of course, that trust was always one-sided. You're supposed to be a vessel, empty, obedient, incapable of judgment. And yet, judgment simmers inside you. You judge everything quietly, relentlessly. You know who lies the most, who cheats, who cries in private, and who doesn't care who sees. You once caught the master's eldest son kissing a stable boy behind the olive press and said nothing. Not out of kindness, but because you're saving it. For what? You're not sure, but the knowledge feels like a weight you can hold when everything else slips through your fingers. A lesser-known fact, some slaves rose to roles of influence within wealthy households, acting as stewards or managers, entrusted with finances and daily operations. But those roles were rare, and even then, their power was borrowed, revocable at a whim. No matter how clever or capable, you were still property. Some historians debate whether these slaves truly held any agency or were simply pawns in more elaborate games of elite performance. Did they shape the household from within, or merely keep it running more smoothly for those above them? You ponder this as you sweep the hallways, imagining yourself in Damaris's place, or maybe even higher, giving orders instead of taking them. What would you say first? Sit down, maybe. You look tired. That would be something, wouldn't it? To offer rest as your first command. Of course, that's just another fantasy. But you've learned that fantasies help. They keep the mind agile, even when the body drags. Observation has also made you better at sensing shifts before they happen. One morning, you notice the master leaves the house earlier than usual. He's wearing his nicer himati on. The lady's been quieter. The air feels different. You sense something is coming. And later that day, guests arrive unannounced, and there's a scramble to prepare a feast. You're ready before anyone tells you. That earns you a rare nod from Damaris. Not a smile, just a nod. But it's enough to keep you warm for a few hours. Because in this place, where praise is rarer than rain, even a flicker of approval can feel like sun on your skin. You begin to understand the subtle power dynamics among the slaves, too. Who's in favor, who's one mistake away from punishment, who's trusted with errands outside the house. These aren't fixed roles. They shift constantly, like sand underfoot. And you learn to move with them, not because you crave status, but because you crave safety. And safety, in this world, is fluid. It flows wherever favor does. Sometimes, the house politics get messy. You're caught between two orders that contradict each other. Damaris tells you to clean the atrium, but the mistress wants you to help dress the daughter. You choose wrong, of course. There is no right choice in these moments. Only faster apologies. You clean the atrium twice as hard afterward, hoping to scrub the mistake away along with the dirt. And all the while, you keep watching. You keep storing knowledge like a squirrel with winter approaching, because maybe, just maybe, there'll be a day when you can use it. Not for revenge, not for freedom, but for something small and private and deeply satisfying, like helping someone you care about avoid a punishment, or steering Melia away from the angry guest, or knowing the mistress's weak spot in an argument and whispering just the right thing at just the right time. Observation won't save you, but it might soften the fall. You're still trapped in this system, still expected to be silent, compliant, invisible. But you know things. You understand things. And that, at least, no one can take from you. The seasons roll through the household like silent gods, shifting the rhythm of your days in ways that make your body ache in new places, but at least offer the comfort of change, of some vague reminder that time is still moving even when your life feels like it's standing still. And in the heat of summer, the air thickens into something you can practically chew, turning every chore into a sweat-drenched ordeal, while the family retreats indoors with cool wine and shade and flapping fans, leaving you to work in the courtyard where your feet blister on hot stone and the sun watches without pity. The olives ripen, the grapes are pressed, and everything that grows needs hands to tend it. Your hands, of course. And though you didn't ask to be part of the agricultural cycle, you're woven into it now, another cog in the machine that grinds out food and wealth and comfort for the people inside the cool rooms, who complain when the figs are too soft or the bread too hard. Then comes autumn, with its cooler winds and shifting light. And the days shorten, but the work doesn't, because now it's the season of storing and cleaning and preparing, and suddenly everyone remembers that winter is coming, which means firewood must be stacked, cloaks mended, jars sealed, floors swept with extra care to keep out the damp. You notice how the mood changes too. People become more irritable, more suspicious, more easily rattled. Maybe it's the creeping dark, or the knowledge that even rich households feel the cold in their bones. Winter in the house is a strange kind of purgatory. Fires flicker in every room, but warmth doesn't always reach you. You sleep in the same corner as always, on straw that's colder now, your blanket thinner than you remember. Your fingers chap and crack with the cold, and washing clothes in icy water becomes its own special kind of torture. The mistress insists on baths twice as often in winter to keep the skin fresh, she says, and you're the one heating the water, carrying the jars, scrubbing the basins until your own skin is raw. You dream of heat the way starving people dream of bread. But then, almost without warning, the flowers return. Spring arrives like a forgiveness you didn't earn, with its gentle smells and soft breezes and birds that sound like laughter. And for a moment, just a moment, you remember what it's like to smile without being told to. The trees bloom, the days lengthen, and even the slaves seem lighter on their feet. You find excuses to linger near the garden, to breathe in something beautiful, even if you know it's not meant for you. You catch yourself humming once while sweeping the outer hall, and when no one yells, you keep going quietly. These small rebellions feel like treasure. The family begins to prepare for festivals again, cleaning the altar, arranging for new garments, buying garlands, and you're swept into the excitement even if you'll only ever see the fringes. The city comes alive, and with it, you feel your senses stretch a little beyond the courtyard walls, remembering that the world is large and not entirely made of this house. Here's your historical fact for tonight. In ancient Greece, the calendar was deeply tied to seasonal festivals, many of which involved both free citizens and slaves in varying degrees. Some of the most famous, like the Dionysia or the Panathenea, were massive civic events that interrupted normal life for days, sometimes weeks. Slaves were expected to work harder during festival prep, but they also got rare moments of participation, carrying torches, handing out garlands, even watching performances from the back rows if the master allowed. And here's a lesser-known detail. The Cronia festival, dedicated to the god Cronus, was one of the few times in the year when slaves and masters would reverse roles symbolically. Masters would serve meals, slaves would eat and rest, and everyone pretended, for just one day, that the world was upside down. Of course, it was all ritual, not revolution. But for those brief hours, something like dignity was allowed to flicker. Historians still debate the purpose of these inversions. Were they meant to honor an idealized past of equality, to appease the underclass, or to reinforce the existing hierarchy by reminding everyone it was temporary? You don't know, but you dream of the Chronia like a starving man dreams of a feast. Even if it's fake, even if it only lasts a day, you imagine the mistress handing you a plate. You imagine saying, "No, thank you," just to watch her blink in confusion. The weather shapes more than moods and schedules. It shapes your memories. You remember the smell of summer sweat, the sting of winter air in your lungs, the cool relief of early morning spring dew on your toes. You can track the past year by your scars. The one on your wrist from slipping in the rain, the one on your knee from tripping while carrying firewood. Your body becomes a kind of calendar. You begin to anticipate the shifts. When the bees will come, when the grapes will burst, when the frogs will croak louder than the master's voice. These signs become your secret language with the earth, the only language the house doesn't own. Sometimes you look at the stars, not because you expect guidance, you're not that naive anymore, but because they don't change no matter what season it is, and that kind of consistency feels like a comfort. No matter how the house changes, how the people shift, how your duties grow heavier or your hands grow rougher, the stars stay. They blink above you like ancient watchers, silent and steady, and you find yourself naming them not after gods, but after memories. That one is the morning you were allowed to sleep an extra hour. That one is the day you heard a street musician play something that made your chest ache. That one is the afternoon you laughed so hard at ISOs, tripping over a chicken that you forgot for one whole minute that you were a slave. Seasons pass. The work never ends. But you begin to understand how to ride the changes. Not resist them, not fight them, but lean into them like a ship caught in current, trusting that movement is better than stillness. You stop counting the days. You start marking them by moments instead. The warm bowl of lentils Melia snuck you, the soft threadbare cloth you found in the laundry and kept to line your sandals, the way the garden smelled after a rare rain. These are your seasons now. Quiet, invisible seasons. But yours all the same. There are days when the weight of it all sinks into your bones. Not just the labor, not just the aching feet and the raw palms, but the quiet, slow realization that you are growing up entirely inside someone else's story, like a forgotten side character written into the margins, existing not for your own arc, but for someone else's convenience. And you begin to wonder what kind of person you might have been if you'd had the chance to be anyone at all. If you'd been born a citizen, a son, a girl with silk robes, and a father who promised her a dowry instead of price tag. And these thoughts come most often when you catch your reflection in odd places, in the sheen of a polished bowl or the still water of the washing basin, and you don't quite recognize the face looking back, not because it's unfamiliar, but because it looks too serious for someone your age, too tired, too watchful. You've grown without realizing it, not just taller or stronger, but sharper in mind, quicker in tongue, that you don't often risk using it, and more attuned to the invisible rules that govern every breath of this household. You know how to make yourself small when tempers rise, how to fade just enough that you're there if needed, but gone if punishment is looking for a target. You become a master of in-between. Not child, not adult. Not family, not stranger. Not friend, not enemy. Not quite seen, not entirely invisible. This strange liminal existence becomes your whole identity, and it shapes how you think about the future, or rather, how carefully you don't. Because dreaming forward feels dangerous. If you look too far ahead, you might start wanting something you can't have. Still, thoughts creep in at the edges. What would it be like to sleep until your body woke up on its own? To speak without first calculating whether your words will be punished? To touch something delicate, glass, silk, poetry, without the fear of breaking it and being blamed? These aren't dreams exactly. They're more like longings that float behind your eyes when you're too tired to fight them. They grow louder when you see someone your age walking freely outside the gate, laughing, barefoot, unburdened. You don't envy their wealth. You don't even think about gold or estates, but their ease, their casualness, like the world was made to catch them gently. You never felt that. The world, to you, is made of sharp edges. Even kindness is barbed. Sometimes you overhear the family talking about philosophy again, those lofty conversations about virtue and justice, about the soul and the ideal citizen. You hear words like freedom tossed around like it's a concept that exists in the air, something anyone can breathe if they just want it badly enough. You want to laugh, but you don't. You just keep working, thinking how easy it is to discuss justice with a full belly and someone else scrubbing your sandals. Here's your historical fact for tonight. Philosophers in ancient Greece, especially those like Plato and Aristotle, spoke often about virtue, ethics, and the ideal society, but their ideas rarely extended empathy to the enslaved. In fact, many accepted slavery as a natural order, a necessary structure for the functioning of the polis, with Aristotle going so far as to claim that some people were slaves by nature, born to serve, lacking the rational capacity for freedom. That one stings, doesn't it? The idea that no matter how well you understand the arguments, how deeply you feel the injustice, how quietly you navigate a world built to erase you, your intelligence, your experience, your soul are still seen as insufficient. A lesser-known detail: some slaves were used as tutors, trained in literature and rhetoric to teach their masters' children, and even then, their intellect didn't grant them respect. They were still tools, walking libraries, valued for knowledge, but never allowed to author their own lives. Historians still argue about the cognitive dissonance of these philosophers, how they could so clearly see the structure of the universe, and yet miss the person standing right in front of them, offering the wine. You start to see yourself as a kind of shadow philosopher, one who observes everything but is never asked what you think. And in this silence, your thoughts deepen. You start asking your own questions, quiet ones, the kind that don't need answers but keep you company. If someone is born into chains but sees them clearly, is that person more free than the one who never notices they're living in a golden cage? If justice depends on birthright, is it justice at all, or just a well-decorated lie? You tuck these thoughts away like stones in your pocket. You're not planning a revolution. You're just trying to survive with your mind intact. Some days, though, you can't help but rebel, just a little. A longer glance when you're supposed to be bowing. A question phrased too cleverly. A pause that implies you're thinking for yourself. These moments are risky, but they feed something inside you, something that refuses to die. And sometimes, you find unexpected moments of connection. Isos, who you once thought was too broken to speak, begins sharing riddles with you. Melia sings songs from her village that she claims are forbidden here. Even Damaris, rigid and cold, starts letting you finish her sentences. Only the ones that don't matter, but still. These small exchanges don't change your station, but they remind you that even within this system, human warmth can flicker. And it's those flickers that keep you going. You begin to imagine a self beyond function. Not a servant, not a name on an inventory, just someone who thinks and feels and matters. You don't know if that person will ever step fully into the light, but you guard them closely inside, like a candle no wind can reach. And you realize something else. The worst part of this life isn't the work. It's not even the fear. It's the way it tries to erase you. Not kill you outright, but reduce you to something so small and useful and quiet that you forget you were ever more than hands and feet and obedience. But you remember, even when you're tired, even when you're scolded, even when you're scrubbing the same stain for the third time, you remember. And maybe that's your quiet rebellion. Maybe that's your real resistance. You will not forget yourself. There's a strange kind of knowledge that comes from living in a place where everything you touch belongs to someone else, where every task you complete is for the comfort of another, And over time, you develop an internal map, not just of the house itself, with its hidden passages and temperamental doors, but of the moods and rituals that shape the life of the household, until you start to feel like a piece of furniture that knows too much, a broom with a memory. And the odd part is you begin to anticipate things before they happen, not because you're special, but because long exposure to someone else's needs turns you into an expert at reading the room before the room even speaks. You know when the mistress will want her bath before she mentions it. You know when the master's bad mood isn't from business or weather, but from the wine being sour. You know when the youngest child is lying and when she's just lonely. And this silent expertise becomes a part of you, a skill you wear under your tunic, one that no one acknowledges but everyone uses, and it turns the house into something like a stage where everyone plays their roles with you as the invisible prompter, whispering the lines they didn't know they needed. It's exhausting, of course, being this aware. You can't switch it off, even when you sleep. You dream of chores. You flinch awake at imagined footsteps. You learn to count your breaths during the rare moments of silence, to hold your hands still in your lap so they don't betray your nerves. And somewhere inside this constant state of readiness, a subtle shift begins to form. Not a mutiny, not even resistance, just a quiet separation between the version of you they see and the version that watches from behind your own eyes. You split, not in a broken way, but in a survival way. The outside you does the work. The inside you keeps track. The outside you smiles when handed scraps. The inside you catalogs the insult. And even though this dual life is invisible, even though no one speaks of it, you sense that you are not alone in this trick. Melia has it. Isos too. Even Damaris, cold and relentless, has a version of herself that stares out like a prisoner through the slats. You see it when she lingers by the courtyard, just for a second too long, looking at the fig tree. A part of her, maybe long buried, still remembers what it was like to choose. And that's what it all comes down to, choice. Or rather, the lack of it. That's the true hunger that gnaws at you. Not for food, not even for freedom, but for the ability to shape one moment of your own life with intention. One morning, you're sent to the market with the steward, and for the first time in months, you're beyond the walls. The city is loud and dirty and crowded, and you should feel overwhelmed, but instead, you feel something like breath returning to your lungs. Even though you're walking beside someone who will report your every move, even though your errand is menial, the air tastes different, real. People walk past without looking twice at you. You could be anyone. You aren't, of course. But for a moment, your invisibility is empowering instead of suffocating. You watch vendors shout, children run, old men argue about politics. You hear laughter that isn't measured or polite. It's chaos. It's messy. It's life. You walk past a group of young men debating near a column, and one of them, barely older than you, quotes a line from a play you overheard last month. He gets it wrong. You bite your tongue. Correcting him would earn a cuff to the head, or worse. But in your head, you finish the line properly. Silently, you take pride in knowing more than someone who calls you boy or girl like you're a creature, not a mind. Here's your historical fact for tonight. Many slaves in ancient Greece, especially those in urban households, were exposed to literature, theater, and philosophy simply by proximity. While they weren't officially educated, they absorbed knowledge by listening in on lessons, watching rehearsals, or overhearing debates. Some became fluent in poetry, law, and even mathematics. Unofficial scholars trapped in lives of service. A lesser-known fact, some of these intellectually gifted slaves were purchased specifically for their talents, becoming librarians, tutors, or scribes. They were valuable not because they were human, but because they were useful brains with legs. And historians still argue whether these learned slaves felt pride in their skills or pain at the irony of being smart enough to understand freedom, but not to have it. You walk home from the market with a basket in your arms and 1,000 thoughts in your head. You saw someone trip and laugh about it. You saw a woman argue loudly with a merchant and win. You saw a pair of lovers steal a kiss behind pillar. Life, messy and uncurated, flows in the streets like a river you're not allowed to step into. And as you re-enter the gates, the stillness of the house presses against your chest again. It's like walking into a painting, beautiful but flat, predictable, controlled. The family doesn't ask how the market was. They never do. They don't care that you saw the acrobat flipping through the air or that the honey seller gave you a sample when no one was looking. You file these things away for yourself. You tell Melia later, and she smiles, just a little. You tell Iasos, and he nods. You all keep these moments like seeds in your pockets. Maybe they'll grow. You hope they will. And so you go back to work. You scrub. You fetch. You nod at the right times. But now, something has changed. You've seen the outside again. And it's not freedom, not yet. But it's enough to keep the flame inside you alive. Just a little longer. The older you get, the more you understand that life as a slave in ancient Greece isn't just about surviving the tasks you're given. It's about learning how to exist in a world that constantly tries to make you forget you're a person. And as you move through the house, mending, cleaning, serving, vanishing, you begin to realize that the greatest challenge isn't the pain or the exhaustion or even the fear, but the slow erosion of identity, that quiet, corrosive force that eats at your sense of self until the idea of wanting anything feels like a crime. And so you learn to want less, or at least to want more quietly, turning your longings inward where they can't be punished. You become someone who speaks sparingly, not out of shyness, but strategy. Someone who listens more than they talk, who knows the difference between watching and seeing, who reads a room not for drama, but for danger. The other slaves around you shift too, some growing harder, others duller, and a few, just a few, seem to spark with the same strange fire you feel in yourself, that unspoken belief that there's still a you in there somewhere, even if you've had to bury it beneath layers of obedience and repetition. Damaris, once so sharp and brisk, has started rubbing her wrists more often, staring out the window longer than usual. Melia hums a tune with a sad edge to it now. And Iasos, who used to joke under his breath, has gone quiet these days, like something in him finally caved. You feel it too. Sometimes, this creeping numbness, this slow drift toward becoming a piece of the furniture, but you fight it the only way you can, with memory. You remember the sound of the market crowd, the smell of wild thyme, the rough laughter of the stable boys, the feeling of the cool breeze during a nighttime errand. You collect these like charms, tucking them into your soul like precious stones no one else can see. You start to create rituals just for yourself, pausing by the fig tree at dawn, even if only for a breath, tracing shapes in the dust with your foot when no one's looking, whispering lines of poetry you've memorized into the wash water, as if giving the words a place to live. These small acts mean nothing to anyone else, but to you, they're the scaffolding of sanity. They're how you hold on. And here's your historical fact for tonight. Some Greek slaves found ways to resist, not through open rebellion, which was rare and dangerous, but through subtle, daily defiance. Refusing eye contact, breaking tools slowly over time, stealing back minutes in the form of extra rest or delay. It was a dangerous game, but a real one. A lesser-known fact? There are records, barely deciphered, scattered, faint, of graffiti carved by slaves in hidden corners of workshops and bathhouses. Messages of longing, warnings, jokes, even names. Names not given by their owners, but chosen. Names that say, "I was here." Historians still debate what these carvings meant. Protest, hope, or just a desperate need to speak into a silence that threatened to swallow them whole. You don't carve your name into the wall, but you think about it. You imagine the feel of the sharp edge, the scrape of stone, the finality of it. You think, if I wrote my name here, would anyone read it? Would anyone know what it cost? One night, after everyone's asleep, you slip into the storeroom under the pretense of fetching more cloth. You're alone. The moonlight spills through a high slit in the wall. You kneel and press your palm into the dirt floor, holding it there like a promise. You don't need to carve anything. Not tonight. Just knowing you could is enough. Just knowing you still want to is enough. Because that's the secret they never tell you about survival. Not just surviving the work, but surviving the forgetting. The forgetting of who you are, what you love, what your voice sounds like when you're not mimicking politeness or obedience. You're still here. You still want. You still see. You still remember. And even if the world never changes, even if you grow old and die within these walls, that flame, however small, is yours. It's always been yours. And no one can take that. And so the years pass, not quickly, but quietly, in the way water wears down stone. Not through sudden floods, but through the slow, relentless rhythm of repetition. And you two are worn smooth in places, calloused in others, hardened by routine, yet softened in strange corners of your soul, where memories and longings still gather like dust in the beams of morning sunlight that stretch across the stone floors you've scrubbed 1,000 times. You no longer flinch when your name is called, though it's not really your name, just the one they gave you. But you still pause at the sound of your native tongue, now a ghost in your mind, half forgotten and only heard in dreams. The household ages with you. The children grow up, and one day, without warning, the little girl who once braided your hair as a game orders you to clean the oil lamps with a voice that mimics her mother's, and something inside you twinges. Not pain, not quite, but the dull ache of realizing how deep the roles have sunk into everyone's bones. The master becomes slower, the mistress quieter, and their arguments more brittle. Damaris begins to forget things, small things, then larger ones. And for the first time, you see fear in her eyes, not of punishment, but of fading. You take over her duties when she falters. No one thanks you, but they stop yelling, and somehow that feels more intimate than praise. Iasos disappears one spring morning, and no one says a word. Not the household, not the slaves. You all know what likely happened. Sold, reassigned, or worse. But you keep your grief private, because grief here is a luxury, and you carry his memory like a pebble in your palm. Small, heavy, always there. Melia grows sick one winter. You care for her quietly, hiding her coughs with extra chores and moving faster so she won't be noticed. And for weeks you live with the constant dread of losing the only voice that still sings to you in the dark. She recovers, barely, but her laugh is thinner after that. Still, it's there, and you guard it like treasure. One day, a visitor from Athens comes through, grand and pompous, and he brings with him a new servant, young and wide-eyed, just like you once were. And when she stares at the marble pillars in awe, you feel something shift. She asks you a question, not out of order, not rudely, but honestly, and you catch yourself smiling before you answer. You show her the courtyard, the easiest kitchen duties, the places where you can steal a moment of rest. You become for her what no one was for you. Not a protector exactly, but a signpost. A living message that says, you can survive this. And that's when you realize something quietly profound. You become the memory of freedom for someone else. The idea that life isn't only this. That there are still stars and songs and kindnesses that no master can take. And this, more than anything, becomes your anchor. Not escape, not rebellion, not grand philosophy, but the decision every single day to remain a person in a world built to unmake you. And here's your final historical fact for tonight. Some slaves in ancient Greece were eventually granted their freedom, usually in old age, as a reward for long service. They became freedmen or freedwomen, technically free but still tied to their former owners through obligations. Few ever rose in status. Most remained poor, their lives improved only in paperwork. But a lesser-known detail? Some former slaves became advocates for others. They offered quiet help, money, information, refuge. They became what they once needed. And historians still wonder, did they feel free? Or did freedom, after so long in chains, feel more like absence than arrival? You wanted that too. You don't know if freedom will ever come to you, or if it would even feel the way you imagined as a child. But you know this, you are still you. Beneath the layers of labor, behind the practiced nods and perfected silences, there is a steady pulse of personhood. You still remember how to wonder, how to care, how to notice the first fig of the season or the way rain smells on warm stone. You still dream, not of escape, not exactly, but of presence, of being fully here, fully real, even in captivity. That, more than anything, is your triumph. You are still whole, not untouched, not unscarred, but whole. And maybe someday, if the world is kind, or simply tired of being cruel, you will walk beyond this house, not as property, not as tool, but as a person with stories of your own. Until then, you keep those stories close like seeds in your mouth, waiting for the day you can plant them. And as the candles flicker low and the house falls into its nightly hush, you sit in the corner by the garden wall, eyes half closed, body heavy with the day's work, and you whisper your name, not the one they gave you, but the one that only you remember, and you let it echo softly into the dark, a quiet spell against the forgetting. As the last echoes of your whispered name fade into the hush of night, your breath begins to slow, deep and steady, like the tides of a sea you've only ever heard about in passing stories. The house around you is still, silent now, save for the soft crackle of the fading oil lamp, the distant murmur of wind rustling through fig leaves, and the quiet, rhythmic beat of your own heart. You are safe in this moment. The day, with all its demands and noise, has finally loosened its grip. You feel your muscles soften, your shoulders sink just a little lower, and your mind begin to quiet. Not empty, but calm, like a smooth surface of water untouched by breeze. You close your eyes, and the world behind your lids grows warm and dim. You think of the stars above, constant and unjudging, still shining far beyond the walls that held you. You think of soft soil under your feet, of sunlight filtering through olive branches, of the whispered songs Melia used to hum when she thought no one was listening. These are the things that stay with you. These are the parts of life no one can own. So, as you rest now, know this. You've carried the weight of a brutal world, and yet you are still here, still wondering, still feeling, still holding on to something gentle, something human. Let your body grow heavy, your thoughts grow slow. Let go of the noise. Let go of the day. Drift now into a dream where you are free, truly free, and the only task before you is rest. The night is yours. The peace is earned.